Every note Haru played on his piano was a prayer sent to a goddess who never listened. As a piano prodigy, his fingers danced with a grace that left audiences breathless, yet his eyes always searched for Elena. She was the sunlight he craved, the childhood friend who held his heart like a fragile glass ornament. To Elena, Haru was a background melody. She used his talent to bolster her status, never truly seeing him. He was the dependable shadow, always there when other men disappointed her. Haru lived for her fleeting smiles, oblivious that he was building his world on shifting, unstable, and treacherous sand. In the silence of the university library, Hana, a quiet assistant, watched Haru from a distance. She had loved him since middle school, a silent flame. While Elena demanded Haru's brilliance, Hana tended his wounds. When his fingers bled from practice, Hana left bandages on his piano. She knew how he liked his tea and the silence he needed after a failed composition. She listened to the music he didn't play, the echoes of his loneliness. To Haru, she was just the girl from the library, a pleasant face in the periphery of his obsession. This balance shattered at a gala. Haru had prepared a masterpiece to dedicate to Elena, hoping to bridge the gap between friendship and love. Instead, Elena arrived with a wealthy businessman who looked at her with a hunger that Haru could never match. She flaunted him, her laughter a death knell for Haru's hopes. When Haru tried to speak, she brushed him off with a dismissive pat, calling his music lovely before turning back to her powerful suitor. The public humiliation was a cold blade to his chest. He wasn't a choice. He was an accessory she had outgrown. Drowning in spite and rejection, Haru went to the library. He found Hana closing up for the night, her silhouette small against the bookshelves. In selfish desperation, he reached out. He didn't offer his heart. He offered a vacancy. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice trembling with pain that had nothing to do with her. He asked her to be his, not because he realized her worth, but because he couldn't stand the vacuum Elena left. He needed a safety net to catch him while he bled out from rejection. Hana wasn't a fool. She saw Elena's ghost in his eyes and felt the coldness in his touch. She knew she was the second choice. Yet she looked at his trembling hands and saw the man she had loved for a decade. She believed her love would be enough. If she stayed, perhaps one day he would see her. "I'll stay," she replied, a soft anchor in his storm. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The following weeks were a masterclass in emotional absence. Haru was physically there, but his soul remained tethered to Elena. He held Hana's hand while scrolling through Elena's social media, once even whispering Elena's name in his sleep. He compared their cooking and clothes, always finding Hana lacking the spark Elena possessed. Hana remained a pillar of strength, even as her body betrayed her. She felt sharp pains in her chest, a worsening heart condition she kept a quiet secret. She feared becoming a burden he'd surely abandon. One cold and stormy night, Hana's condition worsened. She lay on the sofa, clutching her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Haru was in the other room, his fingers drifting over the piano. Just as Hana gathered the courage to call out, his phone buzzed. It was Elena sobbing, saying she had made a mistake. Haru grabbed his coat. He didn't look at Hana's pale face or notice her trembling hand. "Elena needs me," he said. He stepped into the freezing rain, leaving Hana alone in the dark, her fragile heart failing in every way imaginable as she reached for him. Haru drove through the cold, relentless rain, his mind consumed entirely by the sound of Elena's breaking voice on the phone. When he arrived at her doorstep, he found her draped in silken sorrow, a picture of perfectly composed misery. He spent the next 3 days there, sleeping on her velvet sofa and catering to her every whim while she complained about the businessman who had dared to prioritize his work over her. Haru convinced himself that this was a noble sacrifice. He told himself that Hana, being so strong and self-sufficient, didn't need him the way Elena did. He called his blatant neglect a form of loyalty to a childhood bond, completely blind to the fact that while he was brewing expensive tea for Elena, Hana was struggling to catch her breath in the cold silence of their shared apartment. This became the new, agonizing pattern of their lives. Haru was physically present in Hana's life only during the brief, hollow intervals when Elena didn't require an audience. He would come home late, smelling of Elena's expensive perfume, and offer Hana a distracted pat on the shoulder before retreating to his piano to play melodies inspired by another woman's laughter. The emotional distance reached a breaking point during a prestigious gala at the city's grandest concert hall. Hana had forced herself to attend, her body heavy with a fatigue that felt like lead in her veins. She stood in the back of the darkened auditorium, watching Haru perform a piece that was technically perfect, but lacked the warmth it once possessed. When the applause erupted, Elena was the first one on the stage, claiming him with a possessive embrace that the cameras loved. Hana watched from the shadows, a ghost in a beautiful dress, realizing that she was invisible even when she was standing directly in his line of sight. He didn't look for her. He didn't even scan the room for the one person who had bandaged his fingers when they bled. This crushing realization was followed by the total disaster of their one-year anniversary. Hana had spent her meager energy preparing a dinner of all his favorite things, the table set with a precision born of desperate fading love. She waited as the hours ticked by, the candles burning down into pools of hardened wax. Haru never showed up. He was busy helping Elena move into a new penthouse, laughing as they unpacked boxes of memories he should have been building with Hana instead. As the weeks passed, Hana's health began to decline at a terrifying pace. Her friends at the library noticed the way she gripped the shelves for support, her face as pale as the parchment she handled. They begged her to tell Haru the truth about her failing heart, but she shook her head with a sad final smile. She didn't want him to stay out of a sense of pity or a duty to a dying woman. Meanwhile, Haru's music was beginning to lose its soul. He was so busy managing the demands of Elena's chaotic life that he neglected the quiet source of his own peace. He became irritable and sharp, his frustration mounting as the pressure of his career and his secret double life collided. The final blow came when Elena invited him to join a prestigious music conservatory in Europe. It was his lifelong dream, but she made it clear that there was only room for the two of them. Haru sat in their apartment, looking at Hana, but seeing only the obstacle she now represented. When she finally gathered the courage to ask if he would even notice if she disappeared, he exploded. He called her clingy and dramatic, his words like jagged glass cutting through her fragile resolve. He accused her of trying to hold him back from his destiny. That night, Haru went out to celebrate with Elena, leaving Hana alone in the dark. When he returned hours later, the house was empty. The air was cold, and the closets were bare. On his piano sat a medical file detailing the terminal state of Hana's heart, and beside it a thick stack of letters. They were words of love she had written to him every single day, treasures he had never bothered to open until it was far too late. Haru sat on the floor of the silent apartment, the weight of the letters in his lap feeling heavier than the grand piano he had spent his life mastering. As he opened the first envelope, dated only days after they had moved in together, his breath hitched. Hana knew. Every word, written in her neat, unassuming script, revealed a woman who had walked into the fire with her eyes wide open. She had known from the very first day that she was merely the person filling a void, a temporary bandage on a wound left by Elena. Yet her letters contained no bitterness. She wrote about the way the morning light caught his hands while he practiced, and how she prayed that one day the music he played would be for himself and not for a ghost who didn't love him. In the margins, she had doodled small hearts, some of them faded as if touched by fallen tears. He looked around the room, and for the first time, he saw the invisible architecture of his life that Hana had built. He realized that the sheet music was always perfectly organized, his performance suits always pressed without him asking, and the fridge always stocked with the specific herbal tea that calmed his nerves before a show. Every comfort, every quiet moment of peace that allowed him to be a genius had been bought with her silent labor and her failing strength. He tried to call her, but the mechanical voice of the operator informed him that the number was no longer in service. The silence that followed was a deafening roar of everything he had taken for granted. When the doorbell rang, it was Elena, dressed in designer travel wear, ready to whisk him away to their new life in Europe. She spoke of fame and grand stages, her eyes dancing with the excitement of a new conquest. Haru looked at her, searching for the spark that had once blinded him, but all he saw was a hollow reflection. She was a piece of glass, shimmering but sharp and empty. He realized she didn't love him. She loved the way he looked at her, a mirror for her vanity. "I'm not going," he said, his voice a dry rasp. Elena laughed, thinking it was a joke, but when she saw the deadness in his eyes, her smile faltered. He closed the door on her, finally severing the toxic cord that had strangled his soul for a decade. The months that followed were a blur of desperation. Haru's career spiraled as he realized he couldn't play a single note without thinking of the woman who had truly listened. The piano, once his sanctuary, felt like an altar to his own arrogance. He traveled from town to town, following the thin trail of her past, until he finally reached a small, wind-swept village by the sea. At the gate of a modest family home, he met a young man with Hana's kind, weary eyes. It was her younger brother. Before Haru could even speak her name, the boy's expression hardened into a mask of cold, unyielding grief. "You're too late," the brother said, his voice trembling with a restrained fury that cut deeper than any insult. He explained that Hana's heart had finally given out only weeks after she returned home. She had spent her final days watching the waves, refusing to speak of the man who had broken her spirit. Her only final request was a message for Haru. Tell him to keep playing. Tell him his music is the only part of him that was ever truly honest. Haru walked to the seaside, where the gray waves crashed against the jagged rocks. He collapsed into the sand, the realization hitting him with the force of a tidal wave. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. He had ignored a love that was as deep as the ocean for a shallow reflection in a puddle. Years later, Haru returned to the world stage as a renowned maestro. He was more famous than ever, but his music had changed. It was no longer a plea for attention. It was a haunting, beautiful eulogy. He held the entire world at his feet, but he lived in a permanent winter, carrying the heavy, silent scar of a man who learned the value of a heart only after it had finally stopped beating forever.